Welcome, friend, and today we are kicking off a brand new linocut print design featuring two happy toads having fun in the pond together. And my first job is to basically create the white background, which is essentially just initially starting out carving the outline of this piece. I have to say, this is always my first job where I start all of my prints, establishing the background. It's perhaps not the most interesting job or the most fun, but it's a good place to start, partly because it's a fresh new design, a new block. Likelihood is it will have been a couple of weeks in between carvings, so I need to get my hand in again, essentially, and this is a nice sort of low risk way of just practicing, essentially, and getting that feel back for my tools. I'm just speeding the footage up a bit here because this is a time-consuming process. It does take quite a lot of work. The lino that I use is fairly stiff. My tools are nice and sharp, but yeah, it takes an awful lot of time, and there's a fair bit of dead space that I need to remove. And here I'm just going along the edges to make things a little bit easier for myself, because having crisp, clean edges along the edge of the block can basically make the surface a little bit sticky for my tool, essentially, when I'm going close to the edge. Yeah, the edge of the tool can get caught, essentially, so it's not obvious right now, but what is this? Loyal viewers may have a sense of what's coming up. It's already time for a Tolly-break. Tolly, if you're new here, is my glamorous assistant and the brains in this operation, really. He reminds me now and again, as all animals do, that it's important to take time out for the important things, like smooping your cat. Anyway, now that the important business has been taken care of, I suppose I should get along with my carving. I mentioned earlier that this is a great place to start with any new linocut design that I do, partly because, you know, it's good for getting my hand back in, as I say, getting a feel for the tools again. It's also one of the perhaps less interesting, slightly more irksome parts of the process. There's not much that's very fun about it, I have to say, so I'd rather get it over and done with in the first instance, so that I have the fun stuff to look forward to. And also it's really actually very good to establish that strong silhouette around the design, and getting that right in the first instance is really very important, I feel. And here you're starting to see why taking the edges off the block earlier was useful. Gosh, there's so much swarf. Such a mucky pup. But yeah, these tasks where you're having to go right up to the edge and just gently carve out as much as possible without slipping. It's so much more comfortable doing that when you've got that slightly beveled edge all around the edge of the block, so you don't have a perfectly sharp corner to work to. So now that the boring stuff, frankly, has been attended to, now I can start on what I've really been looking forward to, which is starting to carve the actual details in the design itself. And essentially with this first carving of the block, because this is a reduction print, I need to basically remove anything that will be white space in the finished image. So anything that appears white in the design, I'm taking away here. So it's quite fine highlights, I would say, for this design. It's overall going to be quite a dark, murky image, because we've got these happy toads lurking in their pond. So there should be some murky, gloomy areas. But I do want the toad spawn in the pond to be quite clear. I want a nice sort of high contrast and clarity just in that part of the image. So I am being deftly careful with my very finest tool, basically going around each individual egg to try and carve as smooth an outline as I can. And if you've ever tried to carve a perfect circle using a metal tool in a resistant material, it's fun. Hence, you can see when the footage is sped up, I have to move the block around quite a lot, partly because it gives me more control, I feel. That way I get a smoother line, and also it's easier on my wrist if I'm moving the block as much as possible, and keeping my hand and the tool that I'm holding fairly rigid, and just making these very sort of small sort of micro adjustments as I go, as you can see here. One thing that I did earlier on that you didn't see in the previous recording, between that video and this one, is I went over my block with a blue watercolor pencil and just marked out those highlights roughly, just so that I had an extra visual guide for this piece, because I think it can be easy with a complex image to get rather lost in the details. And I feel as this image progresses with each layer, I'll have a clearer sense in my head of what material needs to be kept and what material needs to be removed. But in the first instance, just for the highlights, I need that extra guidance just to make sure I'm definitely happy with where the light sources are and how that light should be distributed across all these different surfaces that we have in play. There's the vertical surfaces of the pondweed and the irises. There's the more sort of horizontal linear surface of the water itself, with all the duckweed basically sitting like a scum on the surface of the water. Some of the water is free of duckweed, and you can see the disturbances on the surface behind. There's a lot of different textures, with smooth and rough, dry and wet. There's quite a lot to consider in this image, and because this print, I'm just using a few layers of flat colour essentially to try and convey all of that complexity. I just need to be quite canny about how I depict all of these different forms and textures, and use the light source and that white space of the paper itself that this will be printed on to help me achieve all of that. So at the end of this session, as at the end of every session, I just take a few extra minutes to care for my tools. They work hard for me, so I need to work hard for them. I'm just using my slipstrop block here to sharpen the edges, adding a little bit of this chalky compound, and that just gives a bit of grist to help hone the edges of all the different tools. And apart from anything else, it's just a nice little ritual at the end of a sitting, just to say, yep, that's it, we're done here. So here we are, a brand new day, a brand new session. And just as I have my rituals for closing out a session, at the beginning of each one, I just bring out my favourite tools, the ones that I know I'm definitely going to be using, and mentally get myself into the zone. And starting out nice and slow, just going in with my larger V-gouge tool here. Still nice and freshly sharpened from my previous session. So yeah, my future self thanks my past self for being thoughtful and sharpening my tools when I'm done with them, because blunt tools when you're looking forward to getting started with a new session are an abomination not to be contemplated. So for this session, it's pretty much just picking up where I'd left off previously, going back over a lot of the ground that I had covered in the last sitting, and trying just very deftly and carefully again to carve out as much clearance as possible around the eggs in the toad spawn, which is spread out in these lovely tendrils. Excuse me. Yeah, it's one of the very pleasing aspects of toad spawn as opposed to frog spawn, that it does form these lovely long ropes, almost like a double helix of eggs, whereas frog spawn just kind of goes all over the place. It's glorious, but yeah, would be a mess to carve. And I'm just going in very carefully to carve out my insignia. This always feels a little bit risky at this point, because all my subject matters are pretty organic subjects. It's rare that you'll see a straight line or a perfect right angle in any of my images, but my insignia is designed to be easy to carve out like this. It's a very traditional artisan's insignia, as used by relief printers and stonemasons and craftspeople going back centuries, if not millennia. So I like these kinds of insignias. There's a lot of history there, but it does mean that you need to get the alignment as spot on as possible whenever you're doing a piece of work like this, because if that perfectly straight little insignia looks even a little bit wonky, it's just going to throw the whole composition off. And linocut is a very unforgiving medium, it has to be said. There are some ways that you can correct some mistakes if your tool slips or if you're not happy with how part of the carving turns out, but by and large, once you've put tool to lino, that's it, you're committed. So if I got that wrong, I would need to start again. And here, for all the duckweed which is sat on the surface, and if you're not familiar, duckweed's just like these tiny sort of pea soup green little leafy things that sit on the surface of ponds. You'll recognise it when you see it, I'm sure. But yeah, they're absolutely tiny, individual little lily pads almost. So I can't carve each one individually, but just carving out some highlights around the intersection of the clouds of duckweed and those larger lily pads, and then that one tiny lily itself. And all those marks that I made just in blue beforehand are really helping me to work out where these highlights need to be as I'm doing this. Oh, it's that time again. Time for another Tolly-break. It is very important to take breaks when you're working hard. Cats know this possibly better than just about any other animals, I would think. It's important to attend to the important stuff in life. So let's all enjoy some cat cuddles. Yes. Sadly, all good things must come to an end, including Tolly-breaks, and I have a lot of work to do. And now I'm just starting on the main feature in this design. Our two toads in the middle, having a fun little piggyback there. We also have the dragonfly and the yellow iris in the top corners, just flanking the whole image. And this dragonfly, I'm not sure how much detail I can get away with. You can see the segments in its body are very teeny tiny and fine, so I'm just using my smallest V-gouge to guide me, and then going in with the larger one and just to open things up a little bit, because I'm aware that whilst I want the highlights to be very fine, when it comes to actually printing, fine details in the block can very easily become flooded with ink, and if there's even a small discrepancy in the registration with later layers, they can be completely obliterated if they're too fine. So I'm mostly using that smaller like 1mm V-gouge as a guide, essentially, to carve out a little trench for the larger V-gouge to follow more easily, and that just opens things up a bit. And as I'm working on the background here of the water, I want to try and work with the chatter as much as possible. And the chatter in linocut printing is basically all those raised edges that you can see, which will pick up stray bits of ink. And it's a bit of a love-hate thing. A lot of artists hate chatter, and they try to reduce it as much as possible, so you have just nice clean areas of white space. Others really love it, and I think the reality is, for most people, it suits some designs or some areas of a design very well, but it's not always appropriate. So I try to use it intentionally. I really love it because there's nothing mechanical about it, if that makes sense. When you can see chatter in an image, you can tell that those are the markings of a human hand. Anyway, I need to stop my chatter for now, because it's time to print the very first layer. And I have to admit, I'm going a little bit off-piste here with the yellow, because initially my plan was for this image just to be a straight up sequel to my bats image, because it's part of the same series, and that image is just 2 layers of ink, essentially. You've got the white background, which is just the white of the paper itself, and then 1 layer of colour, and then the black line work. But for this image, I was looking at it as I was carving and thought, oh, that beautiful yellow iris, they're so vibrant and gorgeous. You see them out in the wild. And I really love the thought of that contrast of the bright as a button, sort of buttery yellow, with the rich dark green that will cover the rest of the image. So it's a little bit of a risk, especially as this is part of a series, doing it this way, but I like taking risks, and it's important to take risks in artwork. So we just have to be brave and carry on regardless. So I've just softened that primary yellow that I have with a little bit of white, just to dial it back a touch. I've also added a little bit of extender, which is just a medium that I add to the inks sometimes if I want to have a slightly softer translucent effect. And I'm now just working in a little bit of wax dryer, which will accelerate the drying process. Normally I might expect a print to take maybe 2 weeks really to dry completely, but with the wax dryer additive, 1 week is normally enough, maybe 10 days. So I'm just using a set square to register my image, and I'm lining up the set square with my cutting board, and then I'm just practicing laying the paper against the block, just to make sure I've got all my processes down pat. And you can see that the design is slightly misaligned actually on my board, because I did think that this block was A4 sized when I bought it. It was pre-cut, and it was only when I started to work on it I realised it's actually a little bit too narrow. But hopefully, the way I've worked out the alignment, it should end up with the artwork smack bang in the middle of the paper. So even though it looks misaligned on the block, it should be aligned on the paper itself. So I'm just applying some very thin layers just over those parts of the image where I want the yellow. Given that we have the yellow in the yellow iris, I thought it would be nice to echo that on the opposite side in the dragonfly. Often you do see, dragonflies come in such a gorgeous array of colours, so a little bit of yellow in this one I think will help to balance the image out quite nicely. And those two sit up the top like sentinels almost, with the cheeky little frog in the middle. So I'm just attempting the first print now. I normally expect the first one or two to not come out all that great, partly because it takes a couple of passes to really integrate the ink with the roller and the block itself. But I'm just applying pressure evenly with my brayer at this point to help that ink transfer evenly. It's so satisfying when you peel it back. And at the moment, because it's yellow on white, we can't really see that much, but I still check each print just to make sure the coverage is reasonably even. And I'm even going a little bit outside of the boundaries of where I need that yellow to be, as I think it'll be quite nice to have that dispersed in the lower part of the image as well. So now it's just the usual case of wash, rinse and repeat until I've got about 25 odd of these. But in the meantime, thank you so much for spending time with me today. I hope to see you in the next video for carving and printing the next layer. Until then, take care. Bye bye.